Welcome to the Analytics of Dynasty podcast. I'm your host, Jordan McNamara, and we're going to do a little bit of analytics of ethics today. And I'm interested in this conversation. There's not going to be a ton of football talk, but I think I've got a unique guest tonight to talk about some of the things that are going on in the world and some of the personal, professional history that we share. I think somewhat relevant to some stuff that's going on in the world. So we'll dive into that in a minute. I just want to plug a couple things for a second before we get into our conversation. I introduce my guest over at the Patreon side. So patreon.com/analyticsdynasty, a podcast a day talking about player values, talking about trade values, talking about player fundamentals on one player a day for the month of June. So for less than, for 33 cents a podcast, you're getting the entire month of June. So $10 month of June, that gets you all the real draft position, all the podcast, the rookie board, the dynasty tiers, all of it over at patreon.com/analyticsdynasty. And of course, if you're not in on the, if you haven't gotten the book yet, analyticsdynasty.com/shop. I've got all my podcasts uploading over there as well. You can get the book $30. If you want to use the promo code Theory, it'll get you it for $25. So it was a recent appearance that I did on Dynasty Theory Show. So I have a promo code going for them. Go ahead and use that, and we'll get them some stats. So, all right. Now I want to dive into this little bit of a bigger topic. Not going to really be football related, but it's a lot about what's going on in the world. And I have a guest on with me tonight, Mike Ramsey. If you've never heard of Mike on a fantasy football podcast, there's good reason for that. He's never been on one. So, Mike, I'll let you introduce yourself. Just broad brush here for a second. Mike and I, I was a former prosecutor. At the time, I was assigned to prosecute protests, actually, at the Air Force Base that's in our local community. And Mike was the chief master sergeant at the time of the Air Force Base, which was the Air National Guard Base, which is the highest ranking enlisted position you can get in the Air Force. And he was in charge of security forces. So him and I became really good friends, testified for me, I don't know, a lot for hours and hours and hours. So there's no cross-examination here. So this is good.
Thank God.
And there are no pro se cross-examination, so even better. So I was interested, and I reached out tonight to ask him, and some thoughts about some of the stuff that's going on. And through that whole process, we became, we've become friends, and our families are friends. And Mike was actually in my wedding, so I think it's an interesting. He's an interesting guest for these times because I think he has some interesting perspective in terms of some of the protest stuff and some of the ethical stuff regards to some of the constitutional rights stuff going on. So, Mike, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. How did I do? Sort of a brief overview.
No, it was awesome. Hit it.
All right.
Killing it.
So, can you dive into your background? So how long were you in the military?
34 years.
Okay, and so that the whole time would have been you were initially Air Force and then Air National Guard?
Correct. Yeah, I did 7 years active duty Air Force, and the rest of it was in the Guard.
Okay, and when did you retire?
Last August of 2019. Yep.
All right, and now I was saying before the show we're in a little bit of a hair growing competition. I've been inspired to try and get my hair in a bow quite like you can get yours in a bow. Those of you watching on video. So can you take me through a little bit? I mean, ultimately, I sort of know how the story ends in terms of, what you did at the end of your career, but sort of walk me through what you sort of did at the start of your career and sort of how it transitioned to being security forces.
When I started, it was security police. So that was August of 1985. I started out at Minot Air Force Base, which is in North Dakota. I worked in the nuclear field. You have people that stay out there to guard different things. You respond to alarms, stuff like that. So I did that for a couple years. Then I was transferred to what they called GLICM, which was ground launch cruise missiles. Over in Europe, we used to have specific bases that had these nuclear missiles there. And during alerts, they would go out into the community, and not the community, but out into the countryside and stuff like that, and dig in. And had the missiles ready to launch. So we called them alerts. I did that for like a year, and then I ended up in Italy, San Vito, Italy. That was my last active duty assignment for 3 years. And before I left active duty, I transferred directly into the Guard at Hancock Field, Syracuse.
Okay.
Oh.
And then you retired active duty and then have been in the Guard, or were in the Guard basically for the rest of your career. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I did 9 years as a traditional guardsman, which is your 1 weekend a month type deal, 2 weeks a year, but I did more time than that. And I ended up coming back in full time in 1999. And I did security forces. I was security forces up until 2015 when I transferred to Force Support Squadron to be the chief of force support. And I did that until I retired in 2019.
Gotcha. What was your job when you were between full-time Air Force and full-time Guard? What did you do for work during that period in between?
I worked for the Monroe County Sheriff's Department. I got hired on there in 1993. I worked in the jail bureau.
Okay. That's Rochester.
Yeah,
New York?
at Monroe County. Yeah, Rochester. Yep.
Okay.
And I left there to go full time back in the Guard. A position opened up, and I applied for it, and I got it. And in between as a traditional guardsman, I had doing the 1 weekend a month thing. I had a lot of opportunity to do a lot of different training. I went to the FBI SWAT school, different things like that, which was really cool. Going back full time, I still had a lot of opportunities to do a lot of different things, which is why I left the Sheriff's Department to do that. Got it.
Let me ask you this: in terms of throughout your education, both as a police officer and then as a in the military and ultimately a military police officer, what sort of education did you get on constitutional rights, and was it different between being a traditional civilian law enforcement and being military law enforcement?
Yeah, there's different things, because for the military it comes down to jurisdiction, which is again, it's constitutional stuff. There's 4 different types of jurisdictions you can have at a base. It's for the Guard, it's a bigger deal than it is active duty, because active duty is all exclusive jurisdiction, which means they have complete control of everything inside the fence. Then you have concurrent, which by agreement you share things with local law enforcement and stuff like that. And then you have proprietary, which you're renting, stuff like that. So jurisdiction means a lot, especially, and this, boundaries of where the base is and where
easements.
The base isn't. Easements and right of ways and Appel versus the United States and all that stuff. But so for active duty, it was easy. So when I was, the jail stuff was easy. I did the transport division for a couple years, and we would fly around and pick up people that were on warrants that had felony charges. So we would fly out to get them if they were held, if we wanted them held, if the county did or whatnot. There were some different things with that. You had to fill out federal paperwork, obviously carry a weapon on a plane and all that fun stuff.
Got it.
But it's the constitutional side. I mean, with a jail, you're dealing with specific stuff, New York State specific rules. They have to have X amount of meals a day. They have to have, rec time. But rec time is defined by different things. So it's not, you don't have to go to a rec center. There's all these different rules. Constitutional wise, though, the Guard was probably the toughest with that, because
why do you say that in terms of it being the toughest?
There's just so many different variables. Like every base, like Hancock Field, for example, is a federal base, but it's kind of leased to the Guard. Almost every other Guard base is Guard property, so it's just a hassle, which we got into a little bit, towards the end, there was a lot of different questions coming down. Everybody had to verify their jurisdiction, because some of the stuff was reported wrong. It was a mess. I'm talking like Guard wide, everybody had to report their jurisdictions, and some of it came from what we were doing. But it comes down to legally carrying weapons, because even though it's a Guard base, we're following their federal rules for that. You don't have to really follow state, but like state penal law covers the Guard. New York State does. I don't know how the other states do it, but New York State, you're covered by New York State Penal Law. It talks about who's exempted from different things in Article 35, use of force, or who can carry a weapon or a dangerous instrument like a baton. And there would be exempted would be, and the New York Air National Guard,
Got it.
So different things like that. But active duty, it's like let's say you're taking a nuclear weapon out into, the field, wherever that thing stops becomes federal property. So, there's a lot of different things with that. And you have to have it that way.
Got it. When let me take a step back for a second. What type of education did you have on, or training did you have on following orders, and when there was ethical concerns about following orders? It's traditionally, it's coined by some, when it's a bad order, is somewhat the Nuremberg defense, right? I was ordered to do it. So how did you receive training on that? Well, let me start with that. Did you ever receive training on that, or sort of how did you go about learning about that?
There's multiple different kinds of that. So for the military, you have law of armed conflict, which is, your actual war stuff. That's annual and right before deploy, regardless when you have it. Use of force and where that fits in, and you have your different stuff with United or the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, that training and where that fits in. So you have that annually. I was the training NCO at Hancock Field for 11 years. So I gave that training in multiple different settings. But for security forces, you had to have it every year. Other people had to have it at different time frames that weren't security forces. But yeah, so we did that annually. Following orders, there's a million different ways to phrase that in the military. But it's annual. And what you deem an unlawful order, there has to be specific criteria that fall in with that.
What are they?
So you have to, a reasonable person would know that's the way it's taught. So if someone is running away and you get a lawful order to shoot that person, you just can't do that. The military use of force is broke down. You have to have different criteria to use force, deadly force. Just somebody running away doesn't meet that until you have more knowledge of what it is. Things like that, especially you can get a lawful order that has to deal with classified material. Hey, if you find, which happens a lot, you have a disclosure of information and someone orders you not to report it, things like that. So that's an unlawful order, because every disclosure of classified info has to be reported. Things like that, if it's someone that's not supposed to have it. So
how did you ever receive, without, you don't need to get into anything specific, but did you receive an unlawful order when you were in the military?
Yes.
How do you sort of, that's coming from someone that outranks you? Correct. Right. By definition, right?
Correct.
How do you sort of handle that? Again, you don't need to get into the specifics of it if it's something you don't want to get into the specifics of, but sort of how do you handle that? And is it something that was like an immediate issue or a non-immediate?
So I can give one example of an immediate issue. So when I first got to Italy, you have to go through pre-training before you get there, which orientates you to the base and the security for us, the security side of, requirements. So when you get to your shift, you're already knowledgeable of local procedures. So my first day on shift, the commander at that time used to always want to come out and meet the first person, the newest person. So I happened to be out walking what we call a close boundary sentry in a restricted area that didn't have alarms on the fence, so you had to have a close boundary sentry. So then this person came out, the commander came out, and I had to, go through the normal stuff. You report your post. And he starts asking me questions, grilling me on questions, which is normal. That's normal stuff. And, it wasn't my first base. So as we're walking around, I'm holding my own. I'm doing all right. And we get around to a access gate. It's not the main access gate to the area. It's a side gate. And there's fuel drums, and it's leaking. We're literally standing in a puddle of fuel, of gas. And he looks at me and says, "Get on your radio and report that." So anybody that was in it at that time knows the radios that we had, and this is back in 1988, that, you could have a chance of spark when you use them because, they're old. It was a different time. And knowing that, because having come from the nuclear field, there was rules, and I didn't know. I mean, I'm not going to test it to see if it really does do anything, but there's like, you don't do this in this situation. So I told him, sir, we need to step over there, and so I can do this when we're not standing here. And he got visibly upset and told me to radio, and then immediately, and I said, sir, let's just go over here. And I just walked away knowing I was going to get talked to later. But afterwards he realized what had happened, and there was some other procedural stuff that broke down, like the fire department that was responding to the fuel didn't know the emergency codes to get in. So we had to work with that. And in the end, he said, hey, you did a great job, and I'm getting a letter of appreciation, whatever. But that was an example. But yeah, I mean, he was hot, and he wasn't just talking to me like this. He was swearing at me.
Right.
But, it's either that or we become the Human Torch. So
right. You just have to do it at that point, right? Isn't it just it's almost, you weren't per se. I mean, he probably saw it as a direct violation of an order, but you were executing his order, just not in the physical location of where it was supposed to be.
Yeah, his exact order was radio this in now when we're standing in, this puddle of gas.
Yeah. So,
and later on he apologized, and, he's like, hey, I'm glad you kept your head, blah, blah, blah. And, it is what it is. But that's one of the direct order that I can discuss. Got it.
So let me, the reason I had you on this week is because, I was texting with you today, and from this week in these protests, and, this specifically the stuff in Lafayette Park outside the White House. And I mean, that's shocked the conscious when I watched some of that video. Yeah. But it hit home a little bit in terms of some of the stuff that you and I have done together. And like I said at the jump, I prosecuted these protesters. By and large, they were peaceful. We didn't have, at least in any of the cases that I prosecuted, and I probably prosecuted, I don't know, between maybe 100 of them in terms of people altogether.
Easily
yeah,
100.
Yeah. It might have even been more than that, honestly.
I would. Yeah.
But the by and large, they weren't violent. No one was charged with anything that was violent. Largely not following orders. Right. And I think we charged them with intentionally trying to block traffic, and in some cases intentionally being on property that wasn't hers. Right. I mean, those were what we charged them with. So it was a crime, what they were doing, but it was in the non-violent realm. But it did touch upon a lot of constitutional issues, and they always raise constitutional issues. And I sort of was thinking about that tonight when I texted you, and I watched this Lafayette Park thing, and listen, there's been violence, right? That, like, no matter, and this is not to get we're not trying to get political here, and you and I sort of we were joking. I was joking when we were texting. I was like, we've never even talked politics. Like, I've known you for how long, and like I don't know how you vote. Like, it's something that has never mattered to me. And so that's not really the point. And I think that largely, in the protest cases out at the base, I think you and I, from an issue standpoint, both disagreed with what their point was. That they were against the use of drones, what they called drones. It's remotely piloted aircraft. I think you and I were both on the, we disagreed with them on the issue. And where we thought that there was, at least I did, that there was, it was your job to protect them. So, that it was we were against them on their issue. In this, I think there's a different, maybe there's differences. I don't think it really much matters in terms of the constitutionality of it, right? If you and you can probably speak to this, there was a difference between them protesting illegally and them protesting legally, right? In terms of what you guys dealt with out there and sort of how you handled it.
Right. And, you know, and you and I have talked about this for, you know, many, many times, but it's more of, you have a right to say, you know, you have a right to protest, but you don't have a right to infringe on free movement, you know, those things. And when you talk about, you know, freedom of speech, the amendment and everything else with that, and it, you know, there's discussion with that. We weren't denying them the ability to protest. The only time we stepped in was when they blocked the gate, you know, block traffic, however they want to word it on their end, they block traffic. You know, so I understood why they were doing what they're doing. That was their right to do what they're doing, you know. But on my end, it was more to make sure that regardless of what they did, that we acted professionally on our end to wrap everything up in a neat little bow.
And there were times where you gave them part of your property to
right, yeah,
demonstrate, right? I mean,
right, and we, you know, we gave them what we call the free speech area and things like that. Which, you know, on their end, they're like, well, free speech is everywhere. You can't define it to an area, but on a military, you know, jurisdictional wise, you can. And you know, there's so many different things that talk about that, especially with what an installation commander can invite somebody on to protest on property and then take it away when they deem necessary. And that's written into many different area statutes that talks about that. And they came out with the Pell versus the United States.
A big constitutional, well, that was out west someplace, right? It was
California. It was California. Oh,
yeah. There was a, so I think it's interesting that we got I think they thought of, you know, ultimately they kind of wore themselves out in terms of wore out their welcome in terms of protected spaces. And ultimately I think they protested across the street on like a weekly basis, essentially.
It's every other week. I think they still do it. I've lost, you know, touch with that since I moved on,
right.
But, you know, I think they exhausted everything they could. The orders of protection, I think in the end worked to the extent that it was used for. Again, you know, the last couple of times that when I left security forces, the last couple of times when they wanted to protest, we were in different FPCon status, force protection conditions that made it to where we said, no, it wasn't me. It was the, you know, after I'd moved on, but because we were in higher threatened state, not due to them, but due to other things. You know, it's like, no, we don't want you to protest. And then they didn't show up. So, I mean, I don't even remember. That was always the question. Like, if we say no, are they going to show up anyways?
Right.
You know, but again, on our end, it was to keep it professional, keep it in check, and just do our jobs and, you know, keep everything at the utmost professional level from our end. Like they can say something to us. We're not going to say anything, but we're not going to give them any, because, you know, they videotape and do different things and they do different stuff. So, which
a lot of times was on YouTube and very helpful to our case. So
yeah. It was,
they were very great. They were very gracious in that aspect. Let me ask you this. So let's change it. You know, let's go a little bit to this week and what the prompt was for me to have you on here was you see this down in Washington and, you know, you're 3 decades worth of military service, right? Your experience with speech issues, you know, as this isn't something new to you. How do you sort of react to what happened specifically down in Lafayette Park outside the White House?
You know, to me, it looked like a crap show. Just seeing how it was taken, and it comes down to, did they have you know, I got other questions flashing in my mind, like, did they have permits? Did they not have permits? Was it lawful? You know, were they supposed to be there? Were they not? You know, there's all these other things, but to go to that extent, and for the reasons that to me was to move a motorcade, you know, to me that was just not. It wasn't. It was way out of bounds. And DC is a jurisdictional mess. because you're looking at the District of Columbia and what it is, and the Capitol has its own jurisdiction. You got Parks Police. You have, there's probably, you can walk across a sidewalk and go through 3 different jurisdictions there, So,
Right.
but when you're looking at federal police and you got Parks Police who federalize, you got all these different things going on. I'm just like, what was that and why was it? To me, it looked out of bounds to me.
Yeah. I mean, I've walked through that park. Right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I lived there for a summer, and I've walked through that park, right? I mean, it's there's a statue of Lafayette down there, right? It's a nice park, and it is a free speech haven, honestly.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
I mean, there's always someone down there protesting something. I remember when I was down there, it would have been 2011, I think it was. Yeah, summer 2011. And there was a person every night that I believe it was the Syrian flag. It was either the Syrian. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it was the Syrian flag or I'm almost certain it was the Syrian flag. But this was an Obama term, Obama administration time, but would stand there every night and like a silent, peaceful protest every night, every single night would stand there with the flag. And no one would bother him, and he would stand. They could see him from out inside. And there was people milling around and different people doing different things. So this isn't like they're on the front lawn of the White House, right? This is a place where this is a known free speech. I mean, not that one of these things really exists, but it's a free speech zone. It's an open public park that's where you can constitutionally speak. Or demonstrate or assemble or whatever First Amendment keyword you want to sort of give to it, you could. And what troubled me was that, right? Plus, I guess there's 3 things. There wasn't anything violent that was going on, right? There was, and I think you and I talked about this before we jumped on, there was an Australian newscast going on live, 2 of them, at least, that I've seen that were down there, women reporters from Australia, and their camera, I think they were both men, but, one of them ended up essentially trampled at one point, and, but they captured the whole thing live, right? I mean, there wasn't violence, and, but I'm interested sort of the use of force aspect of it. Sort of, I mean, the initial clearing of the thing, that's a step that I thought was too far, given that it was it was pre.
Well, it looks like they didn't give him a chance. Just coming from how we did it was, give him a warning. You did the 3 warning thing over a period of 15, 20 minutes.
Right.
Number one, you do it that long because you want to videotape the refusal, but videotaping. But the other side, like it didn't. It just looked like, and maybe it's because of where the video cut in, but it looked like to me it was like, hey, move, boom, and then everything just kicked off, and it just looked so out of bounds to me. It looked like a foul the whole way around. And honestly, who gave the order? Where did it come? What was the authority that it came under? And I try and put myself in a position there. I'm a guy on the line there, who gave the order? Because when the order comes down, you're just going to jump. Where'd it come from? And afterwards, those are the questions that you end up asking yourself at 2:00 in the morning. Where, what I mean? Where'd the order come from? And what was it? Why was it? Not what, but why?
Yeah.
Because I don't know. It looked like a foul. To me, I believe, and then to say, there's tear gas used, there's not tear gas used, and holy crap, man! What else was in that canister?
You thought it was tear gas, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought so too.
They said they use a chemical irritant. Well, tear gas is classified in munitions law as a chemical irritant. So, what where are we going? If you use it, just say you used it. Right. That's my thing, Yeah. But rubber bullets and everything else, that's another thing. But, to pick on, that we didn't use tear gas. Then what was it?
Yeah.
Nobody else said it.
People certainly reacted like it was tear gas. I mean,
that's what made it interesting when the Secretary of Defense, when SecDef got on and he did his own press conference from the Pentagon, and he specifically mentioned different parts. And one of the things is talked about, military personnel weren't involved, didn't use tear gas. He specifically mentioned that. And everybody's like, well, tear gas. No, he said military personnel didn't use it.
Right.
So he didn't, which I'm surprised he hasn't been fired yet. Because some of the things that he said. Yeah, I was shocked. Because he was standing on the podium and he looks at his phone. It's like, I got to go to the White House. And I'm like, he's getting fired.
Yeah.
But, he didn't. Because, he brought up the use of active duty troops in D.C. and said, I do not concur with that.
Yeah.
So
what do you think about that?
Nah, it shouldn't be used. I mean, honestly, that's the National Guard. It's a National Guard mission.
What's the difference?
Well, because the National Guard, you come under governor. The governor, like Cuomo for New York State, he is basically our commander in chief. So it comes into different constitutional stuff when you're talking about title, status, and title. So Title 32 is Guard. Title 10 is active duty or federal.
Okay.
Title 32, you fall under the governor, so your state until the federal federal wants to take you to, mobilize you for Afghanistan or different things. And, when you're looking at that, bringing Title 10 in, and then, from other but from other discussions, I get the feeling that they want to use the Insurrection Act to bring in the title, because that's honestly the only other time, unless a governor says, hey, I got a national, emergency. There's other things. Like when I deployed for Hurricane Katrina, there towards the end, there was Title 10 people down in New Orleans with us. Initially it was all Guard that I saw. There could have been some Title 10 people, but I saw all Guard. It was like a big reunion down there. But later on in the end, saw a lot of Title 10. And they can do that because it's, they declare a state of emergency.
Okay.
So
it wasn't law enforcement. It was.
Oh, it was.
Right.
Well, the Title 10 I saw were security forces.
Oh, okay.
There could have been. I know there was airlift going on and different things like that, but I saw Title 10 security forces down there.
Got it. Okay.
But in the beginning, it was all Title 32 security forces. We actually had to be deputized in that state to use it. That was the agreement that the governor of Louisiana came up with the governor of New York. That's why we could carry weapons down there. It wasn't just New York. There's like 5 other states in the beginning.
Got it.
So, but
yeah, interesting. So let's sort of go back. So let's assume that the military personnel that were down there the other night, they get this order. And you can probably talk to this maybe a little bit better than I can, but there's probably some fog of war stuff going on in terms of, rumors or, what exactly, in real time, who the hell knows what's going on about what is what I found in chaotic situations and, and dealing with police and stuff like that. No one really knows the full story until you come back and think about it afterwards. But sort of, how do you, I guess you're given an order in that, and you might not necessarily know, right? I think your probably default is to think that it's legal, right? Would that be a fair characterization of it?
Well, yeah. So if we're specifically talking about the park, Lafayette Park.
Yeah.
I didn't see any military in that. Mainly, all I saw was federal cops.
Okay.
We don't know they were federal. That's what we were told later on, that it was, Parks Police and this, that, and the other. So it's different for me when you talk on the civilian side about orders and on the military side, when there's orders that come down, and civilian side, someone tells you to do something, you don't do it, you get, written up under whatever departmental, guidelines. Right. Maybe you have a union, you get your union guy involved. On the military side, it's a different deal. And also I think when you're pulling in people from multiple jurisdictions on the civilian side, to me, it creates communication problems, lines of communication problems, who's talking to who, somebody could be in charge of this side of the line that's not from your department, or it could be from your department you've never even seen before. You're like, federal parks is big, right. When you're talking transit, you've got transit people in there. It's big. You got all these different, different agencies that come in there. So you don't know who's who,
right?
Especially when you're wearing all the gunk, You know, you got all your gear on, which hinders communication on the other side of it. But to me, you know, it's just it's a perfect storm for mass confusion. And, you know, once you get your formations and you start moving, to me, that's almost automatic because you practice it. Hopefully they did, but I mean, it looked like they did.
Right.
But as far as where the order came from or whatnot, that to me, that whole setup just was a perfect storm for mass confusion. That's just the way I look at it.
Got it. Let me ask you this. What's your reaction to, so former chairman of the Joint Chiefs came out, Mike Mullen came out, former general, former or retired general, former Defense Secretary Jim Mattis came out, and both were uncharacteristically direct, blunt, and vocal about a lot of the stuff that's going on in terms of, you know, the president, some executive branch stuff that's happening. I'm sort of interested I guess I'm interested in from the retired perspective, what you think about them coming out and being vocal about it now.
I think it's at such the way, and I'm speaking for them, but we're in such dire straits right now with lack of leadership that I think that they felt like they had to say something. And I'm for it. I'm glad they did. There should be some other people coming up to speak out. You know, the only part I didn't like was on, I was watching CNN when they were breaking down Mattis's comments, and they were talking about, oh, he should have done this when, you know, he was Secretary of Defense. Well, you really can't say a lot of that stuff when people forget, you know, he's working directly for the commander in chief.
Right.
So sometimes, you know, you got to dance with the devil. In order to do good, you have to, on the other hand, you know, deal with that crap. And Mattis did a lot of good for the military when he was SecDef. Right. So did Mullen. Mullen was a good Joint Chiefs. He was the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was good. You know, they did a lot of good things. But remember, Mattis stepped down when Trump and him had a change or a difference of opinion about Syria.
Right.
You know, pulling out on partners that had taken, you know, we've lost some people in that, you know, they shed some blood and sweat to get those partnerships done, and all of a sudden we're not there.
Right. How quaint. That seems like it was 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a big deal, and it seems like it was, I can't tell you how long ago that was.
I was 26 then, you know,
right. But I had a lot less hair.
But, you know, I mean, people forget Mattis did, you know, he stuck to his principles on it, and he stepped down.
Right.
You know, they can say they fired him or whatnot, but, you know, we all, you know, people, you can read his letter of resignation online.
Right.
You know, he posted it. So,
yeah, no, I'm interested. I mean, not in anything regarding this, but I have been in a situation where I resigned because I had ethical concerns. And, you know, it's interesting for me, you know, I had ethical concerns with some things that were going on. I voiced them. It was pretty clear that was the wrong thing to do. Well, it was pretty clear from the chain of command's perspective that it was the wrong thing to do. I'd do it in a heartbeat again. And, you know, 5 more people have resigned after me. So, I mean, I think that is all fine. You know, I think my record on it's pretty good, and I'd stand by it. But I'm interested sort of what you, from a military perspective, and the Mattis thing, resigning after the Syria issue, you know, the Syria dispute, I guess is what we'll say, the disagreement over Syria. I'm interested sort of if you saw that in the military, if you was that common?
I wouldn't say it's common. Well, yeah. I mean, it happens, and you never know what the situation or what the topic's going to be that's going to cause it. So when, you know, in the end, and my wife's gone through, she's a chief master sergeant also, this is her last week this week. She retires.
Congratulations, Chief Melinda.
We've both been in those, and in the end, you know, so every branch of the military had something to guide you. So you have your Air Force has core values, and there's 3 core values, integrity, service before self, and excellence in all you do. So you're supposed to apply those to everything that you do. Obviously, you can't do it with you can't meet that all the time, but you're supposed to strive to meet that. The Army has their own thing. The Marines have their own thing. Navy has theirs. I don't know what the Coast Guard has. But, at our end, for me and her, it was more of, I'm going to go to the wall for this, and what happens. It cost me a promotion some years ago, one time, but I always talk about, hey, I can go home and sleep at night because I know, I did this. I did the right thing. So I'm not going to lose sleep over not doing, the right thing. And sometimes it's hard to find out what the right thing is, when you're faced with it. You don't know what it sometimes, but in the end, you got to have, morally, ethically, if you're not brought up with morals or ethics, nobody can teach you those. Nobody can give you those, so that's where I think a lot of things come in to play with, different situations, and, people want to lie about different things, hey, we didn't do this, and shit, the whole world saw you do it, man. That type of thing. So, but yeah, it's in the military, it happens. You see people that, leave their careers at a rank lower than what it should be because, they stuck to their guns and did the right thing. And, they don't have regrets on it. Some people sabotage their own stuff, but, to me, it was like, this is the way it's going to be. If I got to stick up for something that's wrong, like I said, there's a situation that cost me a promotion. Somebody got promoted ahead of me and I was told that to my face. It wasn't me. I'm not, just guessing. I was told.
Right.
So,
yeah. How do you? So it's a common. And I think it's speculated a lot in the news, but I think it's interesting, where there's some thought that maybe Esper is on his way out, defense secretary now. I'm interested how people that leave like Mattis are viewed from the inside. How do you view a person like Mattis? Is it, I mean, so much of what, and it's kind of unfortunate, so much of what we are in society is whether you agree with the issue or not, right? Whether you, if you agree with the president, and he says one thing, you're going to agree with it. If Obama said the same thing and you don't like him, you're going to disagree with it, right? I mean, that's so common in terms of and vice versa. Is it that? Is it, do you sort of, is it come back to, what your relationship was with this person? I mean, how does that how do people react when that happens in the military? Maybe Mattis is a good example.
So when Mattis got removed, there was a lot of people that I saw, and myself included, were disappointed with that he didn't get removed, he resigned. It was disappointed that it came down to that he had to do it, but there was respect that, he's like, I'm not playing the game anymore. This is something that I cannot deal with, so he stepped down. It's just funny watching, because he was, hugely popular in the military community, but it's funny seeing how people are, jumping on him now for speaking out when he was known for that abruptness and, that straightforwardness throughout his entire career. And he was idolized for that. And he, there was the Mattis knife hand stuff and, the Mad Dog moniker that he didn't really like, he said he didn't really like it, but, it suits your, personality. So ride it, but,
right.
He was known for that. Now all of a sudden, because, he's speaking out, it's like, there's an unwritten rule with retired generals that they're not supposed to weigh in on one side or the other political stuff. They're just supposed to shut up and press. But throughout, the ages, they've done it anyways when they feel like they need to. And again, I think it's at the point where these guys, there's a void of leadership and they think they have to step in to help America kind of get past where we're at now and heal, by voicing their opinion on current leadership or lack thereof.
Right. I mean, would you say, so you ultimately respect what Mullen and Mattis did. Would you say you're in the minority in terms of military community on that?
I think I think time's going to tell on that. I mean, again, I see, on different, different groups. One side saying this. It's almost like it's split 50-50 right now.
Interesting.
But I think time's going to tell, because a lot of people that respect that type of leadership aren't vocal about that respect. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense.
In the military, you're supposed to, shut up and do. A lot of people do that. So, but he said what he said, and hey, I support that, but you won't see them on the blogs talking about it.
It's more of a silent respect type thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Do you? What do you have in terms of? If you saw, let me ask you this: if you the Insurrection Act and all this stuff, and the president wanted to, activate, what is it, the military or National Guard for strictly law enforcement purposes, which is a historic no, generally speaking, and you sort of disagreed with that. How would you sort of handle? It's obviously it's a hypothetical now, but how do you sort of? Is that a situation you'd find yourself if you disagreed with it, considering resigning as a person in leadership, or is that how would you sort of handle that situation?
So for active duty, it's going to be different. If they get sent, and again, the Posse Comitatus Act is what prohibits the use of active military in law enforcement situations, except for the Insurrection Act. And then there's the other part of, like the state of emergency or something like that with the governor or something. And even then, like we talked about before, like you were saying, I don't think they can go in and do police duties on that end, but I'm guessing, I'm reaching on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But to invoke the Insurrection Act, if I wish we could pull it up right here and go over it point by point, because the Insurrection Act, it had specific elements that have to be met. And off the top of my head, I can't remember them, because at first, when they started talking about that, I Googled it on my phone, like, what's the criteria for the Insurrection Act? And looking that way, to me, is anybody right now trying to overthrow the government? That's the way I look at and view what the Insurrection Act is built for. Now, there's probably other elements to it, but that's the only thing that comes to my mind right now. No, they're out there protesting. Nobody's trying to do a coup, under the definition. And again, when you being a lawyer, everything comes down to what's the definition of a coup? What's the definition of the Insurrection Act? What's the criteria to invoke the Insurrection Act? That to me is all the things that are going to come down. I mean, according to the papers, not just like the stupid extreme left or extreme right papers, but they already have active duty troops staged around DC. Some were from Fort Drum. That was in the Post Standard today. So, so they're already there. I mean, the point of not going is kind of done. I mean, I saw some other stuff on questionable news media that talks about, active duty troops are saying they're not going to go, they're not going to do it. Which honestly, we'll probably never know if that does happen, because they'll just be replaced, down, with people that do want to go, but who knows?
Or is that a situation where you see Esper resign?
I think, yes.
You think that would be what you would see?
Because after what he said in his briefing, I think yes. If he makes it that far, he went directly against Trump on two different things. So
let's see, it's 10:09 on Thursday. So
yeah, let's pick squares. Let's do squares.
Right.
When he goes. No, I'm just surprised he's still there. And I think a lot of it has to come. Do they have faith in his second? I don't know. Is that playing into it? Because I'm surprised he's still there.
Right.
But I think he would step down. I mean, I think that's why he publicly said that. He does not concur with that use. And like I said, you look at the insurrection part, to me, it doesn't meet it. The insurrection, it's somebody trying to overthrow the government. No.
Right. Yeah. And I'm just breaking it down. Right. No one's trying to. Yeah. And that's basically, I'm just looking over it quickly. When the president considers unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States, make it impractical to enforce the laws of the United States or any state. In the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or suppress the rebellion. And honestly, like if just a blanket cursory reading of it, if people get arrested, they're still going to courts, right? I mean, the federal courts are just fine, right? I mean, there's no, there's people been arrested in my county this week that are still going to court, right?
Yeah.
Those things are working just fine. So it doesn't seem like it would qualify. So I'd be interested. If you think there's like a dispute, you would watch for Esper or whoever his line of succession might be, and almost in a Saturday Night Massacre type of, going back to Watergate, where you saw the attorney general and the deputy attorney general sort of bumped out, and then it was someone else. It was ultimately, in that case, was Robert Bork, the Solicitor General, who did it. But that would be something that you think you would, if that stuff was going on and the military was sort of opposed to it, that would be a place to watch.
Yeah, I think it definitely would come down to Secretary.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah. And, the Joint Chiefs are in there somewhere along the line, but really when it comes to this stuff, they're not technically in the chain of command when it flows, it'll go SecDef to do his duty, But I mean, what you just read, that was part of the Insurrection Act. Was that of the definition of it, or was that what Trump legal team said it was?
No, that's 10 USC 252.
Okay.
So
if you break that down point by point, do you see the protests that are going on right now causing? Yeah. So, I mean, that's to me is apply, as we look at this, apply it to each part. And are these protests doing that? Are they breaking curfew? Yeah. So was that a local ordinance? As a state law? There's still law enforcement going on. So
right.
I feel bad.
I don't think
they're working it.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, we could probably debate this, but whenever the president considers, and it's one of them is the unlawful assemblages. I mean, the stuff that happened in Lafayette Park, like we talked about earlier, was not an unlawful assemblage. I mean, or a rebellion. I mean, that is firmly free speech. So,
because honestly, if they came down and they said, "You guys need to leave. This is your warning," but nobody talked about that. They didn't put out at this time. We went in and said, "Blah." At least I didn't see any place where they broke that down. That's like even the protests in the city.
Right.
You got 1,000 people protesting. You can't arrest 1,000 people. So what's the right thing to do? All right.
Apparently, rubber bullets and tear gas. Shoot journalists, I guess that's what we're going with.
Put journalists on there.
Yeah, I mean, for ultimately a photo op, right? I mean, it was and it's not even a political thing. I mean, that's ultimately what it was. I mean, it's ultimately disappointing. Well, I think that'll pretty much, do it for this. We don't do this very often in terms of non-football related podcasts, but this will be one. I think it's important for what's going on. And I thought I had a uniquely qualified situation and guest.
You're reaching firmly
to come on here and on short notice. He came in and I was upstairs and I said to my wife, I said, "Yeah, I'm going downstairs and I'm recording with Mike." And she goes, which is like funny. It's one of the few times I actually called you Mike. I always call you Chief because that's when I called you on the witness stand the dozens of times that you testified. But I want to thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. Thank you for your service. And I'm digging the beard and I'm digging the hair. So I'm disappointed you put the hat on, but we're sort of rocking this hair thing.
If we do it again, I'll have it going up.
To keep mine going. I got to get it more high and tight and long on top. That's what
I've never seen your hair like that. It's awesome.
It's gonna get better. I mean, I'm working from home, man. It's gonna be a wild scene by the time this whole what bad things coming through? We got a pandemic, we've got anarchy, and we're gonna probably have martial law.
Oh Lord. Oh, that was the other thing. That's when if they declare martial law, that's the third one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to see what happens with that. Of course, the president was just downstairs, checking out as he routinely, I'm sure, does, checking out the security of the underground.
What's that button do? Oh crap! Don't put murder hornets everywhere.
That's the shoot protesters button. Okay.
It probably was.
Yeah.
All
right, Chief. Thank you
man.
for coming on. I appreciate you coming on. Again, this is the Analytics of Dynasty, talking a little bit about some protest ethics. I'm your host, Jordan McNamara. You can follow the podcast. It'll be back to a regularly scheduled and topicked podcast forthcoming. Again, follow all the audio content. I've got the daily football podcast the daily value podcast going on at patreon.com/analytics of dynasty. The group me, I've got strategy sessions over there. If you want to get a strategy session, get in on the concierge level. We can get together for a half hour and talk team building. So one-on-one, if you got a draft coming up, with those sorts of things. So until next time, continue embracing the variance, and we will talk again soon.
Thanks, brother.